Scene one, Apple, take one.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Film Notes, the show where I interview people in the industry about the industry. My name is Shane Borza. I'm an award-winning filmmaker, and I'm here today with Yisrael Dubov, who is an actor on both stage and screen, which I'm very excited to say that. I think this is the first person that I've ever talked to who has kind of walked between worlds, so to speak. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Shane. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, we met recently on a project, and of course, when you meet new people, they're in a certain role, like I'm here to do X. And so you'll be like, oh, they do that. But then we were talking, you do a bunch of things. In terms of acting, though, I wanted to ask, where did you start? Did you start in film and then add in theater and live stuff, or was it the other way around? And also, was this like a lifelong thing? Did you just start this? Like, what's the behind the scenes secret origin?
The secret origin goes back, it's a long story, but let me answer the first part really quickly. I actually started wanting to be an actor in film and television, a screen actor. And then when I started my training, the training that I did was primarily in theater. And it was in that process that I really fell in love with theater, and I found the true aspects of acting. And I think most trained actors will agree that theater is where the actor really gets to act their heart out, for lack of a better term. And I think that's also why most Oscar-winning actors, even though they're screen actors, they're all theater. They all come from a theater background. They all come from theater. They all do theater in their spare time because of how real it is and how good it is for the work and for the art in general.
Now, with that like desire to act, where do you think that came from? Is it like watching movies and saying, I want to do that? Were you inspired by, a lot of people say, oh, I had a teacher or there was a person. So where did that kind of nugget or initial thing come from?
I feel like I always had it, but I was too afraid to let it out or let it show or embrace that. And I started off in the film industry behind the camera, started off in editing. It's a whole story on its own. Moved into directing, and as a director and as somebody who believes in the value of training and always needing to get better, I wanted to learn how to direct actors better. And so I took an acting class. And it was at that moment where I said, this is what I want to do. It was that coupled with multiple things. There was also, I randomly ended up on the Late Late Show with James Corden.
You live alone?
Yeah.
Oh, buddy, I'm sorry.
We're gonna work here?
Okay, it's on. It's going on. There we go. It's on. We're on.
So that happened. So having that experience on camera helped push me in that direction, among other things. But it was those few things that all happened together that made me say, you know what? Forget my fears, forget all those things that people might say about me or the fears of not being able to be successful. And I went for the plunge, and I've been here ever since.
I think for people outside the industry, it seems very like compartmentalized. People are this or this. And the more people I talk to, the more it's like what you said, where people are doing multiple jobs, they're wearing different hats, or sometimes project to project. I'm going to produce this project and then I'm directing that one, and then I'm writing a different one, or people who both act and are filmmakers. And we were talking a little bit about that before, like, well, I've also done some filmmaking, and I hadn't realized that that's what led to the acting. But I think that what you mentioned, and we'll get into more notes later, but like that's a really helpful note for people, is understanding what each role needs, but by knowing that role. And it doesn't mean you have to be the DP and the sound person and the continuity person and the actor and everything, but if we're asking somebody to do something, we don't really understand what that role does. It's very hard to do that, or even to communicate back and forth. And so I'm so glad, A, that it worked out and you're like, oh, acting is the thing, but also that you even just had that idea. Because I think a lot of people, there is separation between the roles, for instance. There's also a lot of different paths. And one of the things I've talked about before with people is, you ask 100 people in the industry how they got in, they give you 100 different answers. So I wanted to talk about specifically your path to the acting. Some people go to an academy, or they go to like a school, whether it's more of like a college or just like something they do, nights and weekends or what have you. So what did that look like for you? You mentioned that first class. Was that like the beginning of a lot of study or different kinds? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so that class I took specifically with the intention of learning how to direct actors. I didn't yet decide that I wanted to be an actor. Never stepped foot in that class ever again. That was not it just put into this, it put a seed into my mind to pursue this. Later on, I eventually did, with my affinity for training and always getting better, did find a school that I wanted to commit to. Spent about 2 years studying what we call the Meisner technique in acting. So spent 2 years in that studio studying the Meisner technique, which is incidentally the technique that I teach in Las Vegas at the moment, but we'll get into that later. And then from there, I just went around, bounced around from studio to studio in Los Angeles, trying to find good, solid training. Went from technique to technique. Just looked for not necessarily the best training, but variations of good training, just to find what works and what works best for me and go from there. And the thing about acting is that, and I think this is true about everything, the training never stops. So a lot of people, they go to college for acting and they say, all right, I'm a good actor now, I no longer need training. Not true. So I'm always looking for more training. I'm always finding new spots and new techniques to study.
And that's another really good point. And I think the difference between people who are like doing the craft, whatever it is, and people that aren't, is the people who are really serious about it and doing it, they're constantly pushing themselves to improve. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially industry podcasts, and big names will talk about like, well, my acting teacher. And you think like, they have an acting teacher? But of course they do, because they want to continuously work on things that they feel like they're not as good at and develop certain muscles, or be known for different things, and say, I want to stretch, I want to grow and do different kinds of roles or show up in different ways. And how do I do that? Well, I need to learn how to do that. And of course, the other part of this is actually doing the thing. So how did you then get your start with actual performance? And what kind was that? Because of course, just like film or theater, there's all kinds of different types of things you can do, whether it's comedy or drama, but it's also like, a commercial or like a documentary or, sketch comedy or whatever. So where did you start off with performance?
It's interesting you ask that question. The the very, very first thing I ever did was something that I self-produced, and if we can call it that. I was about, I don't know, 16 or 17 years old, something like that. And I discovered iMovie on my father's MacBook. This is like early MacBook, but late enough that it came with iMovie. And I turned to my brothers and I was like, hey, you guys want to shoot a movie? And we just did it. It's not good, but we did it. If you want to say first performance, that would be the first one. But then as my journey through filmmaking took place, I was making my own movies as well. And sometimes I would either cast myself in the role, or I would write the script, we'd have the thing, and I would be discussing with the producer, and she would turn to me and be like, you can play this role. You fit the part. So that helped. Having those stepping stones helped, because from those productions that I've done myself, I was able to create a show reel that I was able to show to other people and say, look, this is what I can do. Do you want to audition me for X, Y, and Z part? And then through my acting training, which was primarily theater based, it gave me a strong foundation to work off of to start doing theater. And I was doing a lot of theater out in LA. I got placed in a company unofficially. There's no official company members. Nobody paid membership, but the same director kept calling the same actors back, and that's how you knew you were a part of the company. So I was with them for a few years, and things just happened. Really, it was just one thing led to the other. Audition for one project, wouldn't get it. They would call me back for a different project, would work on that. The thing would show in a theater. Other people would see the film and say, hey, I really liked your performance. Let me get you on this other gig. People seeing the theater plays, theater shows, one thing would just lead to the next, and just pick up gigs here and there.
It reminds me, I have a friend who's from LA, and this was years ago, but she used to say, well, my job is going to auditions. Occasionally I get a break from my job because someone hires me and gives me a role, but really approaching it as like doing the work, constantly looking, showing up, doing auditions, learning the lines, whatever it is, and then occasionally a break because you get something, but really just approaching it like you got to put in the miles, so to speak. But you're right. A lot of it is people seeing you, liking you, or remembering you, and they go, oh, who's good is the guy we saw, a month ago or whatever. So, but if they hadn't seen you, then like you mentioned, you wouldn't have, it's like momentum builds momentum. So you mentioned earlier, and just now again, talking about LA, and now you're in Vegas. So what caused that shift to go from one to the other? Because this is another thing over the last couple seasons where a lot of people, I think, feel, and maybe that's a little different now because there's other hubs like Toronto or Atlanta or what have you, but it used to be you had to either be in LA or New York. And really it's about seeing that there's ways to do creative work outside of those two hubs, and people can have careers and be fulfilled and do work. So with that troupe or company that you were a part of for a couple of years, seemed like you had a good home there. What caused the move? Was it work-based or life-based? Like, if that's something you could talk about.
It's very controversial, but it is definitely a combination of work and life. I was doing a workshop with a casting director who, this was during COVID, who was working out of somewhere in the Midwest. I don't remember where it was. And she was hosting this this workshop. Actors would get on Zoom and they would perform an audition, and she would give notes. And one of the things that she talked about was the fact that everything is digital now. This was 2020 or 2021, everything was digital, and that she was literally in the Midwest hosting classes and workshops for actors in Los Angeles and elsewhere. And she said to the actors in that workshop, she said, now's your chance. Now is the time to make that move. Now is the time to take that vacation, because everything is digital now. In fact, she said she moved her entire office to her home. She no longer goes to an office, and that, I think that's what happened to most casting offices. Yeah, the big ones still have their office because they can afford it, but the smaller casting directors all gave up their acting space, their casting office, especially in Los Angeles, where it's just not worth it. And the same goes for actors. It's not just because these other markets are opening up, like Toronto and Atlanta and New Mexico. The entire industry has gone digital. So actors can audition from wherever they are for whatever project they want, and you no longer need to live, no longer need to pay $2,000 for a studio apartment in Los Angeles on the off chance that you might book a small bit part in a a blockbuster movie that shoots for 1, maybe 2 days once in a year. I don't know. So you're spending how much? 2 times 12, you're spending $24,000 a year on rent to book one role that you're making, what, maybe $1,000 for the whole year, $2,000, $5,000 if you're lucky. So do you need to live in LA? For a lot of actors, no. For some actors, yes. Because what does LA have that the rest of the US does not? Barring New York. Good training. So if you're a very strong, skilled actor, you can live essentially anywhere. If you have the good representation, if you have the good client, or if you have the good foundation of Los Angeles, I think you can. If you have good social skills, especially if they're digitally based and you can connect with people, you can find them on Facebook, you can make their connections on Instagram. If you have those capabilities, no, I don't think you have to live in Los Angeles. So that was one big driving force for me to move from LA. Now, I did say it was controversial, so you can decide if you want to put this in or not. But at the end of the day, I got fired from doing the last play that I got booked in 2021 with that same theater company. It wasn't even the director of the play who said I couldn't do it. It was the theater space. So this company didn't own their own theater. They would rent it from the theater space. And the theater space said that all the actors need to be vaccinated for COVID. And I did not want to get vaccinated for COVID. So I lost the part in the play. And it was at that moment where I decided, if I can't work in this town in Los Angeles, maybe I should move to a town that doesn't really care so much about that aspect. And Vegas was right down the street. So I came to Vegas, and I have not encountered any problems with that aspect of the industry out here whatsoever.
And that's another thing that's important to talk about, is making choices. Because we're all going to have those things that come up where there's some kind of a line there and we're like, well, I mean, and whether it's a casting couch or anything else, there are those choices where we have to say, this doesn't feel right.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if it makes sense or in the long term, I just don't feel comfortable doing this. Or, you know what, I do feel comfortable doing this. I'm going to do it. Because that's the other side, is a lot of times people have to make that leap. And people go, are you sure? Like, do you really want to try to be an actor? You're like, yes, I know, I have to. You're like, okay, you sure only get a job, so and that's something I encourage people listening, regardless of any specific guest position or the specific scenario, is to realize, like, that's the important thing, is noticing when that comes up and making that choice. Because sometimes we go, it's a great role, but this other thing's more important, or what have you. And especially when we think in terms of, long-term, like whether it's the longevity of the career or the life, it's the balancing of these different things. And sometimes we do have to say, I'm going to abandon my life because I can go do this gig and I'm just going to be gone for 3 months. And hopefully I'll pick the pieces up when I come back. I don't want to miss out. And other times it's, well, I'm sure another one will come around, and that's another thing that's sometimes a hard lesson, is when we're starting, like, everything is the most important gig, or the most important, can you meet at 6 a.m. before work? Like, yes, it doesn't matter. I just got home 2 hours ago. Like, I will sacrifice everything for these things. And then, 10, 20 years later, or 10 or 20 gigs later, whatever it is, you kind of look back and you're like, I've had things like this happen several times. I'm sure they'll happen several more times. If I miss out on this one, like, it's going to be okay. So talk a little bit about, now that you're on the other side of it and you are here, what can you maybe see, whether it's being able to just compare and contrast, like, I was there and now I'm here, or you were, then then back then, and now you're here now, like, looking back, so timelines or what have you. Like, what, if anything, comes up now that you're on that other side?
I never experienced before moving to Vegas. I never knew what it was like to be working in a small pond. And I'm noticing a lot the difference between Las Vegas and working in a place like Los Angeles, where over here, I'm just I'm so involved in the film community and the acting community where I can walk up to people and they'll talk about, hey, I was on set with these people. And I can say, who were those people? Who was the director? Who was the producer? And most of the time I'll know who they're talking about. So to be so closely knitted in the industry in Las Vegas, I think is very beneficial. And because of that, I mean, I'd say I'm working more in Las Vegas than I ever was in Los Angeles as an actor because more people know who I am. Now, are they top of the industry like major TV show or film? No, they're not. But that's what I have an agent and manager for in Los Angeles. They're out there. So in LA, I can focus on just getting those big roles that are worth it for me to drive in, work a day, maybe 2 days, even if it was a week, work those days and come back to Vegas. And in Vegas, I could focus on the small roles, the theater, the short films, the indie feature films. I could teach at the studio that I'm teaching at, helping other actors get to this place or give them a boost up to get to, maybe if they want to move to LA, they can get to LA, all those little things. So the contrast is very, very stark. But for certain people, I think for certain instances, it's perfect.
Sorry to stop the show, but we've got some bills to pay around here, and to do that, I wanted to point out a couple things I've got on offer at ShaneBorza.com. As both a master-level mental health coach and an award-winning filmmaker, I have the experience and expertise to help you go further faster, regardless of whether that is in your production or life. I am psyched to announce all my courses and books have been updated and expanded and are available on both Apple Books and at my shop. Especially wanted to point out my film notes book and workbook, where you can learn everything you need to make your film and get it out to the world. If you need help with either your life or film, please reach out. And now, back to the show.
A lot of people in the industry know the improv line of like, it's always yes and.
Yep.
So you can keep it going. And for those that don't know, I am also a professional coach. And so I always try to have people think about in their life, like, how can you have more ands and not fall into these ors where you have to choose between things? And so that's a great example of like the and mindset. Like, hey, I can live in Vegas and I can always go to LA, and I can have a team here and I can have a team there, and I can be looking at both and not feel like I have to choose one at the expense of the other. I did want to get to something you'd mentioned a couple times before, and just again then though, which was the teaching. So talk to me about how you started that and what you're doing with it, and also where.
As I've mentioned multiple times in this talk, in this conversation, I'm a big fan of training and always being better. So one of the first things that I did when I moved to Vegas was looked for training to continue my training as an actor. And what I found heavily disappointed me. And I think that that's one area that Vegas definitely has room to improve upon, is I would not even just acting training, but filmmaking training. So maybe if you know some people, Shane, that want to take on that mantle, I'm happy to join in that as well. But I decided to focus on what I know best and what I know most, and that's acting. So when I found the state of acting training in Vegas, one of the places that I went to check out was a studio called Abbey Ray Studios in Henderson. And at the time, the studio director, Abby, she was teaching a class in acting techniques. And it wasn't even elaborate. It wasn't actors coming in and crying. It wasn't actors even doing a scene. It was just a lecture. This is what acting is. This is what Stanislavski teaches. This is what, and I said, if this is the state of the training in Los Angeles, this is not knocking Abby. Abby's a wonderful human being. I love her to death. She is a fantastic teacher, and she's a wonderful actress as well. But she had to do what the market was asking her to do. And so when it came to what do we teach these actors, well, we can't start working on the scene until they know what acting is. So she started doing this. And when I came to that class, I said, okay, if this is where the actors are in Las Vegas, I definitely have something to offer in acting training. And yes, there are a lot of scene study classes out here where you can go to, you can go to Abbey Ray Studios, you can go to Ben Goldman Entertainment, their acting academy, you can go to Dream Tracks, and they'll all do scene work with you. But I haven't seen a single place out here study technique. And I think this is where a lot of actors, and maybe even people in general, they fall short in their understanding of training. A lot of people think you can play a game and that's enough training, right? But a basketball player, a professional basketball player, plays 83 games in a year, but they still need to go to practice. Like, what are they doing in practice? What are they doing? They're training. They're doing the drills. They're getting that muscle memory up. Acting studios don't do that here. They don't do drills. They don't train. They don't do the work. All they do is, here's a scene, do it. Let me give you notes. That's not training. That's like playing a game and then me giving you notes afterward. It's not drills. Nobody does those things here in Vegas. And one of the things that I teach here, I chose to teach a specific technique called the Meisner technique, as I mentioned at the beginning. And it's all training. And right now we're doing the training in 12-week segments. For 8 weeks, they don't even touch text. They don't touch it, because there's so many other things that you need to learn as an actor before you even look at a word of text. And people, just acting teachers out here, don't do that. They don't know how to do that. So that immediately, when I went to Abbey Ray Studios and I saw the what they were teaching, and I said, Abby, let me come on board. Let me help you. I know this technique very well. I can teach this technique. And I've been doing that with her, or at her studio, for about 2 years, teaching the Meisner technique.
Now, you've mentioned this a couple times, and for people that don't know, can you just briefly encapsulate what is the Meisner technique?
Yeah, happily. I say happily, even though it's very difficult to get into words. What we do over there is we have a free intro class where we really dive deep into what the Meisner technique is, why actors need it, what it is that we train, and all that good stuff. In its simplest form, if you want the elaborate explanation, come to the free class. Meisner teaches actors how to be, I'm hesitant to say 100% present, because nobody's 100% present, but as much as you can be, to listen and respond to the other human being. And what that does is it creates a real chemistry on stage or on the screen, and it creates a real human experience that's unfolding in front of you in the moment. So it's not about rehearsing the scene a certain way. It's not about having preconceived ideas of how the scene is supposed to go. It's about doing the work, and then once the director says action, or once the lights come up on the stage, you're in a brand new experience, and anything that can happen will happen, and to allow that to happen and work off of whatever happens in that moment. And both actors are doing that with each other. So it essentially becomes very magical. And I still go back to, whenever I go back to LA, I go visit the studio that I trained in, where I get to watch other Meisner actors do this work, and they're performing scenes in this way, and there's nothing like it, because it's so human and so raw and so filled with, well, real acting, real human experiences, for lack of a better term.
With this experience, not only in front of audiences and in front of the camera and behind, but also the teaching and where you are now, having moved from LA to being here, I'm curious if any of your interests have changed, like, oh, I'm a comedic actor or dramatic, or I really want to do this, but I haven't been able to, or are you all over the place and doing anything and everything? Like, where is your focus, if any, in what you're doing?
Very good question. It's interesting because I had a student, or I gave a couple of my students a comedy scene. And this happens to everybody. It's very first instinct when you get a comedy scene is to play the comedy. And I had to be very, very clear and very specific to them that they should not and cannot play the comedy. Because if you play the comedy in a comedy, it ceases to be funny. And that's one thing that I came to realize when it comes to acting, and that's why I don't really have a preferred genre, because at the end of the day, it's all just human experiences. And the genre comes out in the writing, the genre comes out in the lighting, the genre comes out in the camera angles and the shots and all that stuff. But from the actor's perspective, it's all just human experiences. So I can't say that I have a preference in terms of genre. I have a preference in terms of story style. That hasn't changed. I enjoy certain types of stories rather than genres or the way things are shot, because that's the director's choice and the writer's choice and the editor's choice, and I leave that all up to them.
Follow up to that, especially because you mentioned, and of course there is lighting and sound design and mise en scene and stagecraft and all that in both film and theater. But do you find as an actor, whether it's that presence and that like raw presence with the other person, because of course if you're doing a live show, you're kind of like doing the show continuously. You might have an intermission or acts, or there's scenes where you're walking off on stage, but it's unbroken. Whereas in film, it's cut, reset, start over. We just need you from this line to here, or we need to exit, and we're still rolling. Let's do it again. Is there a big difference in the way you approach those, or the way you feel, or again, is there a preference there? What are your thoughts on kind of the one versus the other?
It's a question that I get a lot from my acting students as well, is because once again, the Meisner technique is a theater-based technique. And I get a lot of actors who come in and they ask me, would this help me in film acting? And the answer is, of course. Acting is acting. At the end of the day, acting is essentially the same. It's how do we create a real human experience in front of an audience? That's essentially what it is. So the differences between theater and film are in technicalities. Camera likes stillness. So you can have all of the things that the actor is feeling on a stage, they let it just blow up in everyone's face. Whereas on the screen, it's contained to just the eyes, typically. But that doesn't mean that it's not there. It still has to live inside of you. So from a technique perspective, acting is the same. What I like about theater is that immersion, is that liberty to let it all out as it happens, to experience a new moment as it happens, and not feel a need to, quote, get it right, not feel a need to, quote, hit your mark. You're just there living in those imaginary circumstances, in that reality. And I love that about theater. But but on the flip side, in film, there's nothing quite like the immersion that we have in modern cinema, where I say modern cinema, even though we're moving away from that with all the green screens and black screens and blue screens. But for the most part, typically with film, you really get to immerse yourself in the environment. So if you're playing in a war camp, the set dresser is going to build up a legitimate looking war camp, and you have the ability to fully immerse yourself in that world. Whereas on stage, there's a lot more imagination. You have to imagine the black wall is really a wall filled with paintings, and you have to imagine the audience is a closed door that you're in a closed private space. A lot more imagination involved in theater, whereas with film, it can be very immersive, and I love that about film, and the ability that you can play. You can say, let me try it this take. Okay, take number 2. Let me try it a different way. Let me try it a third way. And then we get to take the best moments of all of that and stick it together and create something brand new. So I love them both for 2 very different reasons.
You mentioned the basketball analogy earlier, and I've been a athlete for a long time, and it is kind of like using different training methods to have a synergistic effect upon each other. And so I love talking to people who are like, this strengthens my that, or this and that work together, or, the chocolate and the peanut butter, like they're good apart, but you put them together and you're like, wow. So, I mean, it makes sense to me. But one of the things I always like to point out is, sometimes people are listening to this or seeing this and they're like, oh, like he moved to Vegas and it's fine. Or like, oh, he does theater and film and it's fine. Or like, oh, he's both acting and teaching and it's fine. It is, like I mentioned earlier, there's no one right way. It's kind of finding your niche, your community, and your way. And to go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier of the and saying, look, sometimes we're going to be doing a lot of different things in our lives. And how can we allow them to make space for each other or move forward and say, I don't have to act every day, all day, and say I'm an actor. I could be an actor and say, I do a play once a year or whatever. And maybe I'm taking classes sometimes here and there, but we're moving forward. We are, continuing where we're growing, we're learning, and we're allowing the things to change. Like you mentioned, of starting behind the camera and ending up in front of it. So all that being said, trying to kind of lead us into now more of that reflective part of like the film notes, hence the show title. So whether it's film notes or theater notes or just kind of acting and performance notes, 2 different ways to look at this. One is notes on how people might go about finding a good actor. Where do they go? How do they hire someone? What's the process? And then also notes that you may have accrued over your career for people who might want to do what you do, whether it's stage acting or film acting. Hard-won lessons, things you wish you knew, back then, back when you were a youth, all that kind of stuff.
I'll start with the industry stuff. How does one find an actor? There's so many different ways that people use to find actors. The standard way is to post your project on something like Actors Access or Casting Networks, a breakdown service that is legitimate, that is trusted, that actors can feel comfortable and safe going on, and they can submit for whatever role they want. All the information is there. It's required to be there. Who the director is, how much they're paying, where it's shooting, all that stuff. And they can submit a self-tape or come in for a live audition. That's the standard practice in Los Angeles. However, I mean, I've seen there's so many different ways. If you know somebody that you think is a really good actor, what's his name? Jason Statham was picked up off the street when he was like peddling false watches or something like that, or jewelry. He was a street vendor, and Guy Ritchie saw him. This is the alleged story. I don't know. I never verified it, but Guy Ritchie saw him and he was like, "Hey, you look really good for my Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels movie. Do you want to come audition for the role?" So, I mean, that sort of stuff does happen. but typically people go the mainstream route. Also, casting directors in LA, we don't really have casting directors here in Vegas, but in LA, casting directors and talent agents and talent reps, they go to theater. They watch live shows. They go to premieres. They are looking for new talent. And when they see that talent, they'll usually make a note, they'll mark them down, they'll dog ear them. But I think that's why it's so important to just be active in whatever industry you're in, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a writer, whether you're an actor, just to be active in those communities, because you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who is going to see your performance. I've literally gotten repped in Los Angeles because a talent manager came to one of my plays and saw me and said, "Hey, let's talk." I've gotten cast in films from that. So we don't really have control over who sees us and where, but we can at least show up and do that. And most importantly, I think, as I've mentioned many, many times in the last 45 minutes, to train, to always get better. And I think it's something, I can't speak for filmmakers, but I know that this is an issue in Vegas for actors, where actors just don't understand the value of training. I've spoken to many, many actors out here who just, they want to act, but they don't want to put in the work. They don't want to train. They don't even see the value of training. And I think, this is a theory of mine, I think in Vegas specifically, because we don't have a strong talent pool, theaters and films are forced to cast subpar talent. And when the subpar actors are getting booked, they say, "Hey, I must be a good actor. I don't need training." So they keep getting booked, and then the productions keep having to hire subpar actors. So the subpar actors keep getting told that they're good actors, they're good actors. They never train, and you go through this circle that goes around and around and around and around. So I think that my biggest note for everyone, for any industry, is to train, 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 train. It doesn't always mean to train in technique, in acting technique. It could be anything. Maybe if you're an actor, train in dance, train in voice. If you're a camera operator, I don't know, train in directing, train in writing, whatever those things that might help your career move forward. I think that's important. One thing that I did find that it was like a very big eye-opening moment for me. Yeah, I always used to wonder, you know how every industry has like their terms and their phrases that they use that nobody else knows what they mean. Like the one that comes to mind is a stinger. Like on set, if you hear the term stinger, you know what I'm talking about? For those who don't know, a stinger is an extension cord. Now, why can't they just say extension cord? Why do they have to say, "Hey, can you get the stinger?" And it always made me wonder why, like, why is it important to know these terms? And then one day it hit me as an actor. I was sitting on a Facebook group, on one of those actor Facebook groups where people post their questions or concerns, and this woman posted a concern. She was in talks with this director, and this director was talking about filming, quote, off-screen nudity. And this actress was a fairly new actress. She didn't really know, so she was coming to the Facebook group to get our input. And she posted screenshots of her conversation with the director. And I read through the screenshots. I looked up his name. First of all, the term off-screen nudity was immediately like, what even is that? What is that supposed to represent? Nobody uses that term. But then, even more importantly, I got to his Instagram page, and underneath his name, it said casting manager. And at that point, I was done. I was done with this guy, because the term casting manager is not a thing. It's not a word that people use. You're either a casting director or you're a talent manager. You're never a casting manager. if you're doing specifically reality, and it's never the case for scripted television or scripted films or theater, it's never the case, specifically for reality television, you can be a casting producer, but nobody's ever a casting manager. And when I saw casting manager on this guy's Instagram page, I immediately messaged this actress. I said, stay away. This person is not legitimate. They never are. So big red flags. Don't do it. And what that said to me, what I realized in that moment, is how important it is to know your industry. Not to know the terms people use, to be involved in the community, to know the processes. What are the things that, how is this situation normally handled? If you don't know that you're supposed to have an intimacy coordinator on set, that's a problem. So to know all those little things can also help people navigate in whatever industry they're in. So the two takeaways that I would say, the two film notes from an acting perspective, which can apply to any industry, even within the film industry, is number one, constantly be training, learning, bettering your craft, and number two, to know your industry and be involved in it.
Not only are those great notes, but those are really good stories to like cement those ideas. And they really do impact or complement each other, because to your point, if you're going to any kind of class, you're going to become an electrician. Like, you're going to learn all the jargon because you're around people in the industry, talking about the industry, learning the industry. And it's also that safe place to say, I don't know what that means. Or I heard somebody say this. What is that? Because other people there are also learning. But then it's doubly important because when you're out on the job, people are going to know, oh, they're new. They don't know what any of this stuff means.
Yeah.
Or, oh, they must know what they're doing because they do know what all this stuff means. But either way, it is really important. I want to make sure we get a chance to put a spotlight on you and your work. So where can people follow along, see you, connect with you, hire you, whether it's to teach or to act or any of these other things?
Yeah, I'm mostly active on Instagram. My name is Israel Dubov. No spaces, no hyphenates, just that on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. And then I post a lot of my stuff on YouTube. So I have a YouTube channel where I have some of my full short films, my reels, different things on there. Same name, same channel. And yeah, so if you want to reach out to me from Instagram, happy to chat, happy to talk. I'm always down to just meet people in the industry, whether it's the filmmaking industry or the acting industry. Always down to talk, as my interest in getting involved in whatever communities I'm in, I think, is important. And then the acting academy that I teach at is the Abbey Ray Studios. Also goes by the name Bright Star Acting Academy. Yeah, happy to chat anytime.
Well, I'll make sure that the show notes has all the info. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, you'll see all that info on the screen. Thank you so much for being here. It was great to go a little deeper and to your background and your training. I loved your notes, and I really encourage people to take those to heart. And whether it is acting or anything else, again, this is an ongoing, like, lifelong craft. And just like an actual craft, like we're crafting the output, whatever the thing is we're making, but we're also kind of like learning and deepening the craft for ourselves. So I thought that was such a great note for people.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I had a good time talking with you.
As I mentioned, this is a YouTube show you can watch. So if you're listening to the podcast, please go to my YouTube channel and check it out. And if you are here watching the show and you'd like to share it easily, it is available on all the podcast platforms. We are here every month with a new guest. So please follow, like, subscribe, share, all the things, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the show, please click on the link below. You can also contact me at my website if you have any questions about filmmaking or anything else. Off to the side, you'll see a couple of my books,
film notes and the film notes workbook. I encourage you to check those out if you'd like to learn more about filmmaking. See you in the next episode.
Scene one, Apple, take one.